Finally, on a major topic that so many of you have asked us about, austerity. This policy pursued in governments from England to Spain to Italy to Greece to the United States and beyond is what? It's a program of cutting government spending and raising taxes. That's what it is wherever it is pursued. In most countries it's called austerity, but it has other names too. Names like fiscal responsibility or lowering the deficit. It doesn't take an advanced degree in economics to understand that if you're already in an economic crisis, with unemployment, with troubles coming down the road, with cutbacks of government service, that if you pursue an austerity policy, you're going to make matters worse. Because if the government spends less money, that's less goods and services being purchased by the government, fewer jobs to produce those goods and services. And if you raise taxes on people, they have less money to buy goods and services, and so they will generate fewer jobs. So you're not helping the situation, you're making it worse. And why? Because the government has deep debts. Well, friends, the government has deep debts is what they say. But how in the world would it make the situation better when the government has deep debts to raise taxes and lower government spending? Because even if the government can lower its debts, it's at the price of a longer, worse downturn. Is there something else going on? And the answer is yes. And it's important to stress what the purpose of austerity really is. Number one, it's to save corporations and the rich from the tax bill to clean up the crisis they helped to produce and the bailouts that mostly went to them. They don't want to pay for that. And they're upset that they might be asked to. That we might raise taxes here in the United States, for example, back up to what they were in the 50s and 60s on corporations and the rich, much higher than they are today. And that we might use those taxes to pay for the bailouts they got, to offset the crisis they brought, and to thereby lower the deficit because the government wouldn't have to borrow if it taxed corporations and the rich. They don't want to go there. They would rather us have an austerity policy as the necessary way to deal with the deficit. The real issue, they don't want to pay their share of the costs of the mess they made. And the other reason? Private capitalists are always afraid of the government. That's why they denounce it all the time. They're afraid of the government for a simple reason. Governments, at least where there's universal suffrage, are dependent on votes, and the mass of the people have the majority of the votes. That always raises the possibility that the voting could, if organized someday, see the mass of people using the political system to limit, control, and offset the results of the economic system. Precisely, for example, by taxing corporations and the rich to make them pay for the social problems they have created and from which they often profit. They don't want a strong government because they don't want that government ever to take those kinds of steps. So if the people actually captured their government and turned it in that direction, they want that government to be smaller than it is, weaker than it is, in debt, in fact, the way it is. And an austerity program shrinks the government's footprint, makes it weaker and smaller, and that's a bit of safety for the private sector. Those are the objectives of austerity. That's why they pursue it, even though it makes the crisis worse and last longer. Because a deeper crisis that lasts longer for the corporations and the rich is a relatively small price to pay to make sure they're not taxed to pay for the mess they created, and to make sure they're not endangered by a powerful government that might one day be taken over by the people it's supposed to serve. That's the core of what's at stake in austerity politics.